Congressman Latourette, thanks again for joining us this week.
Yep.
Kind of been a busy week. Let's get right into it. The first thing I want to talk to you about was Obamacare, which obviously the kind of disastrous rollout has been all over the news. Kathleen Sebelius has been testifying on the Hill. It's been kind of a painful experience to watch. What implication does this have? What do you think this means for the future of the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I don't think the full story is written. I mean, obviously the healthcare.gov has been a disaster by everybody's estimation. I think that that's not unusual for a program when it rolls out to have some glitches. What's unusual in this instance are all the other stories that are sort of now piling up, and it's going to reach the point where this really is going to be a Harry Truman, where does the buck stop type of thing, where, I mean, the president says that he's responsible for fixing it, but he doesn't say that he's responsible because it doesn't work. And the same thing with Secretary Sebelius. She says the same thing. But the first story that was sort of bad news for them, aside from the fact that it wasn't working well, was that the contractors who developed the site said that they advised that this thing wasn't ready to go online when it did, and they didn't run a full test. And then the second set of stories had to do, came out of the hearing with Mike Rogers of Michigan, asking the question, are you sure that people's Social Security and privacy information isn't getting in? And they couldn't answer that. And then, of course, the bigger one now today is that up to 2 million people are losing their health care coverage because the plans that they've purchased don't meet the Affordable Care Act standards. And we all remember, I mean, I remember the president saying during the 2012 campaign, oh, no, don't worry about it. If you have health care and you like it, you can keep it. Apparently 2 million so far can't. So that's the problem. And they promised to fix by November the 30th. If it gets fixed, maybe this goes away, but I think this thing has a long way to go.
Well, an interesting thing is, for weeks we were focused on defund Obamacare and the government shutdown and the debt ceiling, and no one was really talking about the problems with Obamacare. Now that we've kind of put that aside finally, the silly season's ended, It seems like, the president's numbers have been declining. Republicans look like they have the upper hand. Should this have been the strategy all along?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and you and I talked about it. What Senator Cruz did and others did were just stupid. Because every day, the Affordable Care Act rollout has had problems since it was launched. But because people were focused on the government shutdown, people were focused on defunding Obamacare and all the stuff that was going on in Capitol Hill, the debt limit, it was on page 3, and it wasn't a front page story. It was my view and the view of a lot of other people in this town that if the strategy had been, look, this thing was not well thought out, it's going to have big problems, and let it blow up all by itself. And John Boehner's favorite expression is, when your opponent's committing suicide, just get out of the way. And if Ted Cruz and that group their strategy had been, just leave it alone and argue about numbers rather than ideology, this would have been a bad story last week for the president. And today's poll by the Wall Street Journal has him 42%, the lowest approval rating of his entire presidency.
We're talking about approval ratings that are now getting close to George W. Bush post-Katrina.
Yeah, that's right.
So when we were talking about the deal that ended the government shutdown, reopened the government, avoided debt default, one of the centerpieces of it was this budget committee, hoping to reconcile the House and Senate budgets. And they finally met. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, they met, they had breakfast, and now they've divided into small groups and are going to begin to sort of find bite-sized pieces. There was a very interesting article today, even though there's, I think, 22 senators and maybe 12 House members on the thing, that it really is a committee of 2, and that's Senator Patty Murray of Washington, the chair of the Appropriations Committee over in, of the subcommittee over in the Senate, and Paul Ryan, the House budget chair, are really going to be the ones driving it. And people are making a lot of positive noises, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the same old, same old. And if Republicans won't go to revenues, and Paul Ryan says no tax increases, that doesn't mean no revenue enhancements. And if Patty Murray and her bunch say we're not going to do any entitlement reform, you're not going to get anywhere. And I really, I don't have high hopes for this. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Well, and even if these folks come to a deal, does that mean that the broader House and Senate are then going to accept the deal that's made? I mean, we've seen a couple instances now where it seems like good deals have been struck by level-headed folks that then get out to the full House and the full Senate, and they're dead.
Yeah, what has to be different, I mean, if by some miracle they're able to reach a deal, then all hands have to be on deck in terms of the leadership. You can't have one leader being a little squishy on it and saying, maybe. And if there isn't that kind of concerted effort, no, you're right, they don't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting it through at least the House. I mean, this bunch in the House, if they don't like the way this thing smells, and the people that they rely on for advice aren't on board, yeah, it's not going to get done.
So another issue that is an important issue, but one, quite frankly, that's been buried because of all the bigger issues that we've been looking at, is the doc fix.
Yep.
And it looks like we've actually had some movement. We saw a bicameral, bipartisan draft proposal circulated this week. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, this is something, again, for people who don't follow medical issues or hospital issues. The 1997 Budget Control Act put in place something called SGR, Sustainable Growth Rate, that sets the reimbursement rate for doctors and hospitals and providers who treat Medicare patients. And because of the budget gimmickry, I guess, there has always been a reduction, a scheduled reduction. In order to get the money necessary to balance the budget in the 90s, they created legal fictions that out into the future. So last year, for instance, doctors were scheduled to get a 27% cut in Medicare reimbursements. Now, nobody on Capitol Hill thought that the doctors were going to get 27% cut. And so every year, the Congress has had to patch it. That becomes tedious. A lot of years it's delivered late because of all the other fights. So recently, the big news on Capitol Hill is they've come up with a $150 billion over 10-year package that would fix this SGR problem so it didn't have to be patched every year. And at its core, it basically is transferring from fee-to-service to an alternative payment method. But what's left undone, because the part that's hard, is where's the money going to come from? And they haven't gotten there yet. But the fact that they're at least moving the ball in that direction, and it has, quite frankly, the where's it going to come from has a lot of people nervous. Because, again, on the hospital side, there's a big pot of money that people are looking at is something called HOPD, where it's the fees that hospitals with branch offices, satellite offices, are able to charge for the same service. But people make the argument, well, it's in your clinic, it's not at the hospital, so it must be cheaper. And so there are a lot of pay-fors that people are looking for. But doctors want it done, hospitals want it done, but people that may be on the chopping block for paying for it are lobbying up.
Yeah, pay-fors are always they're the problem.
Right. It's better when it's free.
Right, exactly. Well, a kind of surprising development, I think, at least this week, was we kind of saw a softer, kinder, gentler Mike Lee and Ted Cruz, both of the Tea Party firebrand senators who led the charge on defund Obamacare, incredibly antagonistic of their Republican colleagues in the Senate, came under unbelievable amounts of fire from their own party. Mike Lee gave a big speech at Heritage this week where essentially he said we couldn't just be outraged all the time, we needed to work together, blah, blah, blah. Right. Ted Cruz said that he wasn't going to work with the Senate Conservatives Fund to go after folks like Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham. Right. What do you think what do you make of this? Is this real? Is this just them feeling heat for having overplayed their hand?
Well, it's a combination. Senator Lee in particular went home to Utah. And all the stories were his popularity was tanking, that people were very disappointed with the approach that he took. And the fact that Senator Cruz sat in a lunch meeting a couple of weeks ago with his fellow Republican senators and said he wouldn't basically repudiate this group that's going to take them out in primaries was stunning. And so I think that their strategies have had some backlash, and they're having to deal with that. It's going to last as long as the backlash lasts, and then they're going to be right back at it. Today, the scrawl and the the bottom of the TV is Senator Cruz's father says that President Obama should go back to Kenya. So we're dealing.
Always very helpful for the party and messaging. That's just really like that's what we want right out there.
So we're dealing with a certain mindset. I don't think that they've changed their stripes. They're going to continue to be and pander to the groups that promote them. But clearly, yeah, they got whacked around pretty good, and they're just taking a little bit lower profile.
Well, thank you once again, Congressman Lobster.
Yep.
We look forward to talking to you again next week.
Me too.